The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Hear ye, Ontario voters, it's on. With hundreds of candidates fanning out across the province, tonight we'll hear from veteran Queen's Park operatives and observers about what the parties hope will be the winning message in June. First, we'll check in with Erin Kelly to find out what people are already talking about in this election. It's Wednesday, May the 4th, and that's tonight on The Agenda. Imagine being able to scan every newspaper and social media feed each and every day to find out what the people of Ontario are talking about during the provincial election campaign. Well, the artificial intelligence known as Polly does exactly that. And with us tonight from London, UK, is Erin Kelly, President and CEO of Advanced Symbolics, Inc., who makes the data that Polly collects intelligible to the rest of us. Erin, it's good to see you, and I guess we should remind everybody that you're going to be with us on a regular basis every week during the course of this 43rd general election campaign. So let's just start at the beginning. What's the state of play as we sit here talking tonight?
The state of play tonight is Doug Ford is in a comfortable first-place position. Polly sees him winning 75 seats today, with the NDP. Interestingly enough, the NDP is in second place. The Liberals are in third place, but here's what's really interesting. We have twice as many people talking about Stephen Del Duca as we do Andrea Horwath. So Andrea's numbers are going down a little bit, while Stephen Del Duca is going up.
Is there much undecided vote to speak of?
Not really. There doesn't appear to be undecided. Now, where there is undecided, I would say for Mr. Ford, those voters appear to be pretty solid right now. Where there is indecision is in that NDP Liberal competition.
And if you look at, say, the past, 3 to 6 months, in the lead up to the campaign, does any party appear to have any momentum drawn from that period of time that they can bring to the campaign today?
That's a tough one. Well, what Doug Ford is drawing on in terms of his momentum, he got a lot of momentum out of the budget, but of course that was quite recent. I would say Andrea Horwath was drawing momentum up until about the beginning of 2022. When Doug Ford was going through a difficult time during COVID, when people felt that there wasn't the investment made in hospitals, et cetera. But she lost quite a bit of momentum during the trucker protest when she wasn't seen. She didn't say anything. Doug Ford got some lift out of that by calling the state of emergency. And Stephen Del Duca, that's when he starts to become known, because he came to Ottawa and he has been speaking out quite a bit since the beginning of this year about how to come out of the pandemic, et cetera. So I'd say Andrea Horwath has lost some momentum. The other two seem to be, well, Stephen Del Duca is gaining momentum, and Doug Ford is just kind of cruising along. He was losing momentum during COVID, but he has gained back some momentum now with the budget and also with how he behaved during the trucker protest, interestingly enough to me.
Now, that's the data, but of course, we're always looking for explanations behind the data, and I'm going to throw one out here, and you tell me if this makes any sense. Obviously, the Premier's been around for 4 years in the big job. People know him. Andrea Horwath has been around for quite a while. This is her 4th general election as NDP leader, so more people know her. Maybe more people are talking online about Stephen Del Duca because he's the new guy in this contest and they're trying to figure out who he is. Is that reasonable?
Actually, what we're seeing is the reason people are talking about Stephen Del Duca is because of, number one thing they're talking about him about is the buck a ride, bringing down the cost of transit. It seems to have caught on as a meme, if you will, and we see a lot of people talking about that. Andrea Horwath, her policies are, lowering income taxes for lower and middle income people. We're seeing that seems to be a complicated policy that it's not easy to talk about, so we're not seeing people talk about it. So in fact, twice as many people are talking about Stephen Del Duca, 12.5% of all discussions about politicians are about him versus only 7% about Andrea Horwath and her policy. So really it is policies. She's not grabbing people with her policies so far.
I guess I would say parenthetically, they've both made big, expensive promises, Del Duca and Horvath, as it relates to public transit. Del Duca's is catchier, I think. You know, buck a ride is very simple to understand versus the NDP's, we will subsidize half the operating costs of municipal transit systems all across the province. Not quite as grabby, although it may be, who knows, more effective in the long run. Any evidence that you've picked up so far, Erin, that the Greens can win more than one seat this time out?
We're not seeing it so far. No, we're seeing exactly one seat.
So Mike Schreiner keeps his seat at the moment.
At the moment. So, you know, we're very, very early days. But at the moment, just one seat.
I'm glad you said that, because my next line was going to be reminding everybody that polls are an excellent indication of what people thought yesterday. They don't tell you what people are going to do 28 days from now. So we put that on the record as a good reminder to everybody of the fact that we're a long way from the finish line here. All right, that's the leaders. How about the issues? What are the main things people are talking about right now?
Number one thing is affordability. So anything to do with affordability, but you have to keep it really easy to understand. You know, I'm going to reduce the cost of housing. Daycare is very hot and interesting. Inflation generally, but not so much inflation as what specifically are you going to do that's easy, that I can tell my friends that you're going to do this. You know, as we said earlier about Andrea Horvath, her policies are just too complicated, need to get it really simplified. But affordability is by far the number one thing. Also of interest, if I look at some issues in education, that one's complex. We have some people who want to see more innovation in education. We also have a lot of middle to lower income people very concerned about things they've heard that Doug Ford was going to make changes to OSAP, and they're very, very concerned about that. And that is a vote costing issue. We actually see people switching their vote over that. And so just affordability issues in general, I would say, is by far the main issue. And of course, in that sense, Doug Ford's license plate refunds and saying he's going to get rid of that expense has really, we're seeing a lot of people talk about that. So simple, bite-sized ways to save the taxpayer money, that's a winner in this election.
I wonder, though, Erin, whether anybody looks at the promises that will be emerging over the next few weeks' time, and whether they say, cost of housing, nobody can do a damn thing about that. Inflation, nobody can do a damn thing about that. I mean, I appreciate that they're making promises, but are these promises landing with any credibility with the electorate that you can pick up?
Good point. With inflation, not as much. And that's why I said don't emphasize that too much, because a lot of people feel that premiers can't really affect inflation. For housing, they do feel that the premiers and the leaders have a role to play here. People understand that municipalities, there's a feeling that municipalities have to approve more housing sites, have to do more, and that the province has power over municipalities, and so they can make that change. There is concern of who's going to build these houses. I mean, we can't find people to work anywhere right now. So there's definitely maybe we have to rethink the types of people that we bring to Canada, maybe less of the nuclear physicists and more of the people with hammers who build houses and do those jobs. Because I think for a long time, we've just been bringing in the same kind of new Canadians, and maybe a lot of people talking about we need to change that.
And what is Polly picking up in terms of which segment of the electorate would be most fiercely interested in the housing issue right now?
All of them.
Everybody.
No, it really is everybody. I mean, even people who own a house are worried about their children. We see grandparents talking about their grandchildren. And of course, the young people themselves, people 18 to 25, and older into their 30s, but 18 to 25 is the group that often doesn't vote. Well, they might vote now because they're concerned not just about housing, but rent. I mean, just cost of living. I mean, am I going to be living with my parents forever?
This is what people who are in politics say. More men are interested in what the Conservatives have to say. Liberals and New Democrats, who tend to focus more on social services, have a greater appeal to the female part of the electorate. Does Polly pick up that break as well?
She does. There's definitely more. We still see men are more interested, are more likely to vote Conservative than NDP, for sure.
And what about on the issue of, say, healthcare and education? Does any one party seem to have a clear advantage over another on those kinds of issues?
Interestingly, Doug Ford, because I think he's been talking about it more. So, you know, you might not like Doug Ford, what he's saying about education, but the other two aren't saying anything, so there's no alternative there. And the people who do want to see changes in education are then more likely to vote for Doug Ford. So it's definitely a hot topic. And I think that the other leaders need to address it. They need to address what they would do in education. And I think saying we're going to keep the status quo is probably not a good campaign strategy right now. There's a lot of people talking about it, and I'd say there's not enough different options there.
Well, this is why I'm glad we're going to be seeing you every week, because Stephen Del Duca this morning made an announcement about education in which he pledged to take the money that he's not going to need because he wouldn't build Highway 413 and take that $10 billion and put it into, I think it was building 200 new schools and upgrading or renovating 4,500 others. So I'll be interested to hear what Polly has to say about that next week. What about, you know, nobody seems to want to talk about COVID-19 anymore, and it hasn't gone away, actually. We've still got lots of people in hospital dealing with COVID-19, but none of the parties has really spoken about it yet at all. Is Polly picking up any conversation among the electorate on that front?
Yes. So it's really interesting. We looked at how people felt about politicians when we entered COVID and how they feel about politicians now. And people were a lot happier with politicians when we entered COVID. We're seeing that people felt that politicians did the right thing during COVID, you know, shutting everybody down, giving CERB, all of that. But they don't feel we're doing the right things coming out of COVID. So either because we're coming out too quickly, that's what some people feel. Other people feel we're not coming out quickly enough. Other countries are out, they're doing things. Our economy is going to fall behind. And there's chaos, obviously, at this right now. I mean, some of it because of COVID, but some of it outside of that. So there's definitely a feeling that things are out of control and that the politicians need to do more to get a handle and steer us out of COVID the same way that they steered us into it.
And yet, you don't hear any of the politicians talking about it right now. It's almost as if they want to leave it in the rearview mirror and talk about anything except COVID-19. Any theories on that?
Yeah, and the population wants them to talk about it, first of all. And I think the reason they're not probably is because it causes fights between the parties, right? It becomes a wedge issue. But we need to find a way to talk about it so that the population feels it's being addressed. There's a plan. Here's the problem. Like, you know, in Pennsylvania, for example, when they brought back the mask mandate, everybody knew what the rule was for bringing back masks. 50 people in hospital, mask mandate comes back. People are saying, we see a lot of people saying online, what is the plan here? When do we bring back mask mandates? We keep being told it might happen, but what's the metric for that? What will success look like? How many people in the hospital before we start to say this is over? Like, what are the deciding metrics that people should be looking for? And that guidance isn't there. Just saying that, even something neutral like that, I think would go a long way to having people feel that there's a plan, and because trust is very low right now.
Interesting. Let me focus on the Premier for a moment here, because, of course, I think the first question everybody asks themselves at election time is, do we want these guys back? And if they do want them back, then it's going to be a pretty uninteresting campaign. And if they don't want them back, then you got to fight for who replaces them. So on the issue of Doug Ford, he's obviously a very polarizing figure. A lot of people love him. A lot of people can't stand him. Why? I put this question to progressive people all the time. If he's so hated by so many people and you guys don't get him, why is he in first place? Is there an answer for that?
Why he's in first place?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, we find that maybe the ones who dislike him are balanced out by the ones who like him, and maybe, you know, the other two parties, Andrea Horwath is not winning hearts and minds. But we definitely see him. He's in solid first place. He's not fighting for his job at this point. So it's definitely his to lose. And we're not seeing the vitriol against him that you might be led to believe through mainstream media. I hate to use that term, but.
No, I get you. I get you. At this point, and again, we're early in the campaign here, very early. I mean, this is day one, for goodness sakes. Early in the campaign, do you see the makings of any kind of dynamism in the electorate right now, which suggests they might be open to a different argument or persuaded to go a different way for whatever reason over the next month?
Well, it's interesting. We do have a category right now that we opened this year called vote switchers. So these are people so we've got people all categorized. These people voted PC in the last election. How many of those people are thinking of switching? Same thing for Liberals and NDP. So that would be a good thing to follow up on next week. And, because it's early days right now, we do see some people being interested in what Stephen Del Duca has to offer, so they might switch their vote. Right now, we're seeing a lot of the vote switching conversation between NDP and Liberals. So that's definitely something that we will be tracking through this election.
Now, that makes sense, because the NDP and the Liberal, and the Greens, for that matter, are all sort of trying to be the champions of the progressive side of the political spectrum. But are there, well, maybe it's too early to ask this question, but I'll try anyway. Are there vote switchers that you would see between Liberals and Conservatives, or even, say, between New Democrats and Conservatives?
We're not seeing that right now. So early days, but right now it looks like Ford Nation has a pretty solid following. And the fight is between the NDP and the Liberals. And the strategy here for Horwath has to be to not let people remember Stephen Del Duca and put her fight against Doug Ford.
Gotcha. And again, last question, just so I'm clear, is there any suggestion at this stage of the game that there is enough of an undecided segment of the electorate that it could affect what seems to be the prevailing narrative that all pollsters are saying right now, which is this is Ford's to lose?
We're not seeing anything, any kind of monster coming up to bite Doug Ford right now. So I might reveal, you can play that back for me as we get closer, but right now, no, we've been looking for what's the gotcha, and so far it's pretty smooth.
But that's why we stay tuned, because you just never know what's coming around the corner.
Exactly. It's early days.
Right on. Erin, as always, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Yesterday afternoon, the Premier of Ontario visited the Lieutenant Governor and advised her to dissolve the 42nd Provincial Parliament, sending hundreds of candidates off to the hustings. Today was the first full day of Ontario's 43rd general election. And over the next nearly 1 month, Ontarians will begin to engage more with the leaders, their parties, and the issues. Our first question is, what's this election about anyway? We have 5 guests who have some notion of how to answer that question, and we'll introduce them to you in order of their party's precedence in the last House, starting with Zara Sultani, who is a PC party consultant. Kim Wright is a principal and founder at Wright Strategies and an NDP consultant. Tim Murphy is CEO and managing partner at Macmillan LLP and a Liberal Party consultant. Sean Yeo is a Green Party consultant. And keeping them all real is Sabrina Nanji, journalist and founder of the Queen's Park Observer. And it's great to have you 5 with us here on TVO tonight. And I want to start with that very simple question. And Zara, you get it first. Very simply, what's this election about?
I think it's a little bit too early to answer that question. As you know, we have about 4 weeks to the election day, and every week in an election in the political realm is a lifetime. And we could be coming back here talking about completely different things next week. So as it stands right now, I think we're looking at the path to prosperity with the rise of inflation. I think people are mostly looking at pocketbook issues and issues around cost of living, cost of housing, etc.
Okay, Kim Wright, in your view, what's this election about?
To me, it really is about where you want to take this province. And one of the things that we saw during the pandemic so clearly is what is the role of government? What are the institutions that Ontarians really do count on, not in some sort of theoretical, poli-sci class, but when we start to talk about how we build a community, how do we make sure that our long-term care facilities are actually taking care of our loved ones? How do we make sure our public health institutions are not only talking to one another, but are demonstrably keeping people safe? Those are all part of the role of government. So what you have to have is a government that is interested in fixing the problems, not just talking about them. But how do you actually move forward? How do you connect with people? And that's what you're going to see over the course of the next 28 days through all of the campaigns. But certainly that's the focus of Andrea Horwath and the New Democrats.
Tim Murphy, what's this election about?
Well, I think it's ultimately a referendum on the government and whether, frankly, you think the healthcare system is better than it was 4 years ago, whether you think the education system is better than it was 4 years ago, whether the issues of affordability, of the costs of groceries, of housing, of just living every day is more easy to afford than it was 4 years ago, and whether those things were handled well over the course of the last 4 years. And then once you kind of come to the answer to that question, the question is who's best positioned to then, assuming you're deciding to change, can best fix some of those problems. And Steve Del Duca is the answer to that question.
That's the first time I've ever heard him called Steve Del Duca. Are you breaking news here today, Tim?
Yeah. I break news whenever I've just known him for so long. I apologize. I know it's the official frame, but just so we're clear, Steve, we only have people who look like Steve comment on television as well.
Follicularly challenged, I think, is the way you want to put that. Okay, I get you. Sean Yeo, come on in here and tell us what this election's about.
I think the people of Ontario have a very important and legitimate question to ask: how are we going to be taken care of over the next 4 years, and how can we take care of each other? And I certainly agree that a huge part of that is looking at the record of each party and asking how well did they do in the last 4 years.
Sabrina, your view.
Well, I think certainly what the electorate are telling pollsters is that it's affordability, and what we're hearing from the parties, it's kind of like, what exactly does affordability mean to you? That can be everything from being able to afford a down payment on your first home to, as the Liberals have proposed, getting a break on your grocery bill, with scrapping the HST from prepared foods up to $20. So I think it's cost of living is if I had to pick one issue, I would go with that one.
Okay, let's do a second round here where I think Tim is right in as much as usually the first question the electorate asks themselves are, do we want these guys back? And if the answer is yes, it's a fairly rudimentary campaign. And if the answer is no, then it gets a little more interesting about who's going to take over. So let's start with that. Zara, I presume you're going to say you think that Doug Ford deserves re-election. Tell me why you think he deserves re-election.
Look, I won't say that. I mean, I think that's a question that is being posed to all Ontarians to answer. So what I will say is that I'm a firm believer that people don't vote governments in; they vote governments out. And if we look at the track record of the PC government, they governed a full 2 years, 2.5 years almost, in a very unprecedented situation. They are coming out of this global pandemic in a fairly sort of okay situation, and I think people aren't necessarily angry with how things were handled. It's a good time. It's a springtime. People are getting happy. People are happy that they can go out to restaurants. Sort of this getting back to normal is happening much more nowadays. And I think people are looking ahead, and they want a government that would show them that path to what is the next stage going to be. And like I said earlier, there's going to be questions around cost of living, and they want to see plans that will address those questions. And I think with the recent budget, the Ford government has put forth a pretty decent plan on how to get back on track.
So in your view, nothing egregious that you would point to saying they deserve to be unelected. Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're starting with 7 points lead in the most recent poll, and Premier's personal approval rating is okay as well. And I think they're in a pretty good shape going into this election.
Okay, you will not be
things
shocked.
Can change.
Indeed, they can.
By next week.
As you pointed out in your first answer, you will not be shocked to hear, Zara, that I suspect the other people that you were on the program with tonight may not share your enthusiasm for re-electing the current government. And let's do the next round with them as well. Kim, here's what I'd like from each of you, and that is, don't tell me 25 reasons why you think the current government doesn't deserve re-election. Let's get to one. What's one significant reason that you think has rendered the Ford government unelectable a second time around? Kim, start us off.
Well, let's start with, when people show you who they are, you should believe them. And leading up to the pandemic, what we saw was Doug Ford walking away from his ending hallway medicine promise. We saw him walking away from parents of autistic children, when Lisa McLeod famously, said, give them an iPad. All of these types of things, cutting and gutting public health across the province. Those were things that the Premier did in his first half of this cycle, let alone the fact that he didn't spend the money that was earmarked for pandemic, that should have gotten people rapid tests. It should have helped put together our school system to actually get those HEPA filters in and all the rest of that. It eventually maybe sort of got there, but Doug didn't do it. And so it really was about prioritization. And I will say, looking at every one of his budgets, let alone the school strikes and everything else, looking at his budget, looking at his record, when people show you who they are, believe them, not just what they try to promise you during that election period.
All right, Tim Murphy, in your view, the biggest reason why the Ford government does not deserve re-election is what?
So I'm going to cheat slightly and give you two. So one of them is, I think at the end, when you look at kind of the record of the government, I think the problem is it's plagued by incompetence in reaction to the issues that they had to address. And frankly, to be fair, look, when the pandemic came, it was unprecedented. And I think everyone appropriately gave all governments a degree of slack in figuring out how to respond to it. But we're in the sixth wave. By then, the practice should have made you pretty good at it. But when you look at education, when you look at healthcare, we've insufficiently funded them. We're putting people in danger in terms of how they're going to be able to protect themselves from COVID, underinvesting in healthcare, underinvesting in long-term care, where we've lost an enormous number of people through COVID. And then when you look at kind of the tools that this government uses to respond to the issues, it feels like they pull the tools out of the 50s. What are we going to do? Build a bunch of highways. Well, that doesn't respond to climate change. That doesn't help with affordability. And you look what Stephen Del Duca is promising, $1 a ride for transit. Boy, that's going to help. That's like thousands of dollars in saved transit costs for people. The cutting the tax on prepared foods, of helping people on the affordability on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's modern solutions and a competent record against an incompetent government and 50s solutions.
Sean Yeo, your view on why you think the government does not deserve re-election?
I think it's pretty clear that Doug Ford is someone who wants the credit but doesn't do the work. What we've seen is more politics as usual, gimmicks in half measures. When we want to see someone who's going to roll up their sleeves and do the work, we can look at someone like Mike Schreiner of the Green Party, who's gotten so much done with a single seat in Queen's Park and has been referred to by the political media more than once as the most effective opposition that we have in Toronto right now.
He is actually the one guy who voted against returning the $1 billion in the license sticker rebate. So that certainly makes him stand out from the rest, for better or for worse. Sabrina, I am not going to ask you whether you think the government deserves to be reelected or anything like that, because that's probably not fair to put you in that position. But let me twist the question a bit this way for you. The most significant commitment that Doug Ford made 4 years ago while campaigning for office that he kept, what do you think it is?
Well, I think it kind of depends on your vantage point on this front, because certainly a lot of these, promise made, promise kept, that line that we keep hearing from the Conservatives can be spun a little bit. For instance, I'm thinking of this gas tax cut that was a little late in coming. It's temporary. We need to give the Ford government a second mandate in order to see, 5.7 cents shaved off for 6 months only. There's, a tax cut for folks earning up to $50,000 when we know, 4 years ago, they promised a 20% income tax cut for middle income earners. And I would say that it sort of depends on your spin of that. I think the NDP had crunched the numbers and said Ford broke 37% of his promises. Another one that he's broken, I guess you could say, is restoring the Auditor General's oversight of government advertising, something the Liberals had scrapped, and that kind of matters just ahead of an election time too. We kind of saw these flashy taxpayer-funded ads, saying Ontario's back stronger than ever after the pandemic. So I think it kind of depends on where you're viewing this from, and of course, the pandemic has certainly changed the Premier's tune. I should say Conservative leader Doug Ford. A lot has changed in 4 years. I think one big thing that they've broken is promising to balance the budget. We didn't quite get a specific timeline back for that in 2018. And then soon after, when they were in power, they promised to balance the books by the end of fiscal 2024. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to give the government another mandate beyond the current one that they're vying for. By 2028 is when they say they'll balance the books. But I don't know if that's really hurting them so much, especially coming out of a pandemic, if there's much appetite for austerity measures. But what a difference. They swept a majority in 2018, promising to cut the gravy, as the Fords like to say. And now they're pumping Doug Ford up as a yes man, someone who is a big spender, boasting, record spending budget, says yes to big, expensive, popular projects like highway infrastructure, hospital builds, that sort of thing. So, I don't know if promise made, promise kept is quite the line they're going with this time. It's more about saying yes. And I don't know if being a yes man is quite I think that could also be spun too by his political opponents.
Well, I suspect some of them will want to do that right now. And just before I asked Tim to follow up on that, you said, and by way of explanation here, Sabrina did just say the Premier, I mean the PC party leader, and that is not because he's no longer the Premier. He's technically still the Premier of Ontario, but there is a tradition that during election campaigns, you refer to the leaders only as the leaders of their respective parties. So that just is a little explanatory note behind that. Tim, you're, I think, along with me, old enough to remember back in the late 1970s when the Liberal leader of the day was called Dr. No by the then Premier of the day, Bill Davis. The Liberal leader was Stuart Smith, and it effectively worked very well for Bill Davis to say, I'm the guy of yes, and they're the party of no. Do you worry that history repeats in this election campaign with another Tory leader and another Liberal leader?
No. Look, I think it was a different time, a different context, and part of it is in the context of the kinds of things you're putting forward, and it's meant, I think, to reflect, to be honest with you, in thinking about Stuart Smith, the character of the person, right? It was a more academic person coming to the table, and he was Bill Davis was the experienced politician, frankly, much more of the center of this province than Doug Ford. So, to be honest with you, I don't really understand the yes men thing. I mean, I guess they've decided on it. Good for them. I don't think it communicates anything particular to the voter. What I actually think I think what we're really in is, to your earlier question about, the first question is, do we kick the bums out or not, as I think you wrote. But for me, the real question is this the 1999 election or the 1985 election? You remember in 99, Mike Harris was running for re-election, and he ended up actually winning re-election, but with the Liberals extremely close behind. In 85, Frank Miller, won just by a few seats, but in a minority with the Liberals just behind. So I think that's That's the race we're in. Are we 1999 or in 1985, not the 1970s?
Do you know what the answer to that question is yet?
I don't. I think we'll, we need to get closer to the election day to know the answer.
Okay. Kim, let me come back to you and say, I wonder whether, yes, they promised to balance the books in one term, and they didn't get that done. Yes, they promised to reduce electricity rates by X percent. They didn't get that done. Yes, they promised to cut the gas tax by X percent. They didn't get that done. There were a bunch of promises they did not get done. However, do they get some kind of a mulligan on a lot of this stuff? Because COVID-19 for 2 years essentially exploded everybody's budget and changed all the rules. What do you think?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the reality is that these stopped being unprecedented times, well into this. As Tim rightfully pointed out, we're in the sixth wave of this. So your mulligans are much more run out. The fact that the Premier has not spent all of his pandemic spending that was supposed to help people get rapid testing, get the infrastructure upgrades that our school system so desperately needs and our long-term care facility so desperately needs, but also going back to what the Premier had promised pre-pandemic. We weren't seeing the investments into hospital care. We weren't seeing it into childcare. We weren't seeing it into school systems. All of these are now wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Maybe we'll get there if you elect us. But even then, their unicorn in every pot budget that they tried to introduce, frankly, they're not necessarily even going to go forward with that. So the questions really do continue to be raised. Who is Doug Ford? What is he actually promising? And what does it mean to you on the ground and in your homes? That's the challenge that everyone is having.
Zara, do you think the government is entitled to a bit of a mulligan given what's transpired over the last couple of years?
I think for sure we can't hold them to the same account as, let's say, a government that was elected back in 2014 and was, let go, was voted out 2018, right? I think definitely with the promises and with the agenda you have for a full 4-year mandate, when you enter into something like a global pandemic like we did, I think that's going to change a lot of things, right? The priorities change, the spending sort of plans will change. And I think it's unfair to say that we can't cut them a bit of slack because of what happened. And I think it really doesn't matter what I think as a consultant. I think what we see is that people do cut the government slack for having dealt with that. And I think generally in these situations when government comes out of a crisis like this, or whether it's an economic crisis or something that people really see as a threat to their livelihood, I think now coming out of that, people are generally appreciative and they have a positive view, or if not positive, definitely more neutral. And I think they're a little bit more forgiving when it comes to some of those promises that were made in 2018. Apologies.
Let me get Sean on that because, Sean, I have heard when you go out and you talk to people, you do hear people say, he's trying his best. I hear that a lot. And the fact of the matter is, the Conservatives, and admittedly polls change, but the Conservatives are and have been in first place in the polls for several months in a row now. Do you think the public is giving him a kind of a mulligan that other governments were not entitled to in different times?
Yeah, certainly unprecedented times, but what we're hearing at the door doesn't really line up with they get a pass. While they were unprecedented times, unfortunately, the leadership and outcomes under Doug Ford were anything but. It was the same old politics as usual, gimmicks and half measures. I think there'd be more room for saying that there's a bit of a mulligan here if they had done a great job, but they didn't do a great job. They did a pretty terrible job. So I think that we really need to think about how we're going to help people see the next steps forward. And we need to have real solutions and new solutions for Ontario's old problems. And the only party that can do that is the Green Party.
Sabrina, let me get your analysis on which party, based on your reporting and based on what you're seeing and hearing so far, which party is the biggest threat right now to the Conservatives being reelected?
Well, if we're paying attention to the polls, I think the more compelling race is the one for second place. But of course, campaigns matter. We're only on day one, and so a lot could change, in the run up to June 2nd. But we've now been seeing the Liberals overtaking the NDP, as forming official opposition, and that's a pretty impressive feat considering they were decimated in 2018. Not a lot of people know much about new-ish leader Stephen Del Duca. He only took the helm of the party in 2020, and what people do know about him isn't exactly good. He's got a lot of political baggage to overcome, and his opponents are tying him to the Wynne era and some of those unpopular decisions at the time. Partially privatizing Hydro One. He's got some personal political baggage. Let's not forget about a backyard pool he wanted, and maybe tried to skirt local rules around that one. He was censured by the Auditor General for putting GO stations in his own riding, against expert advice. But I think this speaks to the strength of the Liberal brand, which actually Innovative Research Group had put out a poll suggesting that that's taken a bit of a hit, but is still going strong. And so a lot of Ontarians might identify themselves as, so-called small L Liberals. But I think in terms of the race for second place here, we've seen a lot of similarities in what the Liberals and the NDP are putting on the table. We don't have a fully costed platform from the NDP yet. I don't know if Tim knows a day for when we're getting a full platform from the Liberals, but they've been putting out planks piecemeal, and there's a lot of similarities there. Everyone's in line to get a minimum wage boost, even from the Conservatives as well, phasing out for-profit care. So I think that's going to come down to regional battlegrounds, the GTA, the Windsor, Essex area. There's a few incumbents that are NDP incumbents that are not running again. And of course, we know incumbents tend to get a leg up on the ballot. There's name recognition. You can run on your record. So certainly there's a lot more competitive races, including in the GTA, the vote-rich 905, which can make or break you. Doug Ford and the Conservatives are polling pretty well. They must be feeling confident. They're kind of sitting pretty with a healthy lead. But that's kind of, we can see who they're targeting, and that's the 905. The Premier was rallying in Brampton, and then in the heart of Ford Nation in Etobicoke today as part of his campaign kickoff. There's a lot of promises from the Conservatives on the table that are friendly to motorists. It's all about highways, highways, highways. A gas tax cut, as I mentioned earlier. A refund on license plate sticker renewals. So I think it's interesting to see who's being targeted here, and I think we're going to be paying close attention to who's going to come in second place.
All right, let me do a couple of follow-ups with Tim here. First of all, Tim, do you know the day yet when the Liberals will unveil their fully costed platform?
I don't. I mean, they will release it over the course of the campaign, and it'll be available for voters to assess. I think you'll continue to see issues that address, the core issues that voters care about, right, in Ontario: healthcare, education, the cost of living, affordability, and the environment. And I think it'll all be in the context of a responsible economic stewardship, which Liberals have been known for. So you've got, for example, we've seen, a significant investment coming in bringing better ventilation and quality to our schools, building new schools, and that's going to be derived from canceling the 413, which is built into the Conservative budget. I think the reality around the economics is that, voters have kind of got comfortable with the notion, frankly, that governments run deficits. It's really a question of, can you convince the voter that you're a responsible economic manager? And I think, Stephen Del Duca has had experience in government, experience running a government, and has been a responsible economic manager, on a personal level and on a political level. So I don't have the date, but you'll see it.
Okay, and part two of my question for you is, you know, there has been a lot of coverage of the pool business in his backyard and of also intervening as the Minister of Transportation to favor his constituency with a Metrolink stop that Metrolinx didn't think should have been there. How much of an albatross is all of that around his neck?
I don't really think it is. I think, you know, look, the reality is campaigns are an opportunity in Ontario, as you well know. I mean, coverage really focuses on the government, and the opposition leaders get their opportunity to introduce themselves during campaigns. I have to say, the thing that's impressed me most about Stephen Del Duca is he's actually been out and getting attention despite the fact he hasn't had a seat in the House. And he's been doing that through great ideas in healthcare and education, et cetera, which is a pretty phenomenal success for someone in his position. But also, look, and I think the point was made, you know, there is, you know, a residual acceptance of the Liberal Party as the primary opposition to the Conservatives in this province. Frankly, my view is the best opportunity ever for the NDP to stop the Conservative government was in the last election, and they couldn't succeed. So the only really alternative to stop it is the Liberal Party under Stephen Del Duca, and I think he's putting forward the ideas and has the kind of, you know, average Ontarian perspective and background that I think will be attractive to voters who are looking for an alternative.
I think Kim may not quite share that view in just quite that way, so I'm going to give her a chance to weigh in on that. I know you're shocked to hear that. But I will put the question to you this way, Kim. You know, this is Andrea Horwath's fourth time leading the party into a general election, and it does raise the question of why anyone should assume that the outcome this time would be any different than the outcome the three previous times. What's the answer to that?
Well, her growth pattern has been fantastic. But what I will also say is Tim Murphy and a number of Liberals in the dying days of the last campaign, when Kathleen Wynne's campaign was tanking, said, don't worry, you vote for Doug Ford. He's going to be way better than Andrea Horwath. And they
I don't think she quite. In fairness, I don't think they quite put it that way.
Omar Khan.
Not a word of that is true.
Omar Khan, who is a spokesperson for the Liberals, went on television and made sure everybody had that exact message, which was Andrea Horwath will be worse than Doug Ford, vote for Doug. So that, to me, is a very problematic conversation. But also, let's look at the polling that Andrea finds herself in every campaign. And Greg Lyle from Innovative Research Group has talked about this. She has this very fascinating anomaly that happens during a campaign, that everyone during a campaign goes, wow, okay, I like what she's saying. I like the energy she's bringing forward. I like how this is going. And her popularity, frankly, skyrockets. And then post-election, this province sort of gets collective amnesia and goes into their natural parking lot of the Liberal Party. And then what we are seeing, and we've already started to see this in polling research going into this campaign, is as Ontarians are being introduced, in this case to Stephen Del Duca, they're not loving what they're seeing. I mean, there's lots of ballyhoo about this Buck a Ride program that he has put forward. But even Jennifer Keesmaat, who ran for the City of Toronto, had looked at this in the last campaign and said, it's not financially viable. It's actually going to cost transit agencies more. And in fact, we know this, so we've seen this. Anybody who spends any time in municipal government or dealing with transit agencies knows that most of the money comes from fare box. And so if you're rating that fare box, as the Liberal plan does, and not putting in substantial amounts of operating, it's going to be problematic. And I know Tim's going to try to say things like, but they've got $375 million they're earmarking for operating, except for the TTC alone, their operating budget is $2.2+ billion. So that's going to get wiped out pretty quickly and isn't going to go to London or Windsor or any other municipality that wants to increase their transit. So things, as always, look really pretty when Liberals talk about them. When you get into the details, it's problematic. So Andrea Horwath is fascinating in that she's developed a great slate of candidates, including some incumbents like John Van Toff and Catherine Fife and France Jelena. She is, as always, her steel town scrapper self, who's also ready to be premier. And we're going to see that in battlegrounds from Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge down to Windsor. We're going to see it across the north. We're also going to see New Democrats playing in areas that you don't traditionally think about them in the 905 in particular. But also remember that the New Democrats came in first or second in 100 of the 124 ridings last election. We are ready to govern. Andrea's ready to govern, and she's got a team around her that's ready to capitalize on this. Whereas Mr. Del Duca, who I've known for a very long time, is going to have a hard time winning his own seat, remembering that he lost that seat in the last campaign.
Okay, I feel obliged to let Tim have a bit of a comeback on that one, and then I want to hear from Zara. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, actually, none of what Kim said actually concerns me, because I think at the end of the day, when I look at actually the team of Liberals that Stephen Del Duca is running, it's impressive. We've got doctors, people who've run hospitals, educators. We've got a former member of the Bank of Canada, Andrea Barrack here, done an incredible array of candidates ready to help run this province in the appropriate cabinet posts if they ever get so lucky as to be there. But at the end of the day, look, I think when Ontarians have historically said, we are looking for an alternative to a Conservative, they turn to the Liberals, and that has been the pattern throughout. The one, and I repeat it, but I think it's an important point, is when you look at the last election, was by far the best opportunity in more than 30 years for the New Democrats to say we can beat the Conservatives, and they couldn't. And so I think if you want an alternative to the Conservative Party, Stephen Del Duca is your only choice.
All right, Zara, let me get you in here with just a few minutes to go. And, I've mentioned some of the things I've heard on the hustings about the other leaders. Now I want to tell you something I hear about Doug Ford. And that is, the guy's been premier for 4 years and he still can't make an announcement without a teleprompter. Does he not know what he thinks? Does he not know how to make a presentation yet? And that may not be the worst sin in the world, but it certainly helps if you look like you believe what you're saying and don't need to read it off a teleprompter. Is that a fair criticism in your view? I do hear it out there.
Sure thing. There are challenges that still the team and Doug Ford still have, but I think bridging back to what others said a little bit earlier, I think looking at the alternative, what we see right now is two different campaigns have started. One is for the Premier of Ontario, and the other one is for the Leader of Opposition, right? I agree with Tim that Horwath had her chance back in 2018. I think throughout the past 4 years, and especially throughout the pandemic, she's been generally an effective leader. And I think it's probably time. I mean, I'm surprised that there wasn't an NDP leadership before this election, but that's just me. And additionally, the way Liberals have also been campaigning, and sort of this exchange that we just witnessed, it's proved that these two parties, Horwath is fighting for her existing job, which is the Leader of Opposition, and Del Duca's plan is to come in first as the Leader of Opposition and then prepare to for the next election, prepare to run an actual campaign to be the Premier of Ontario. So in that sense, really, I don't think the Ontarians have another real alternative.
Okay, I should just point out for the record here that the last time Andrea Horwath submitted her leadership to members of the NDP, she got, I think, about a 77-78% endorsement number, which is not bad as these things go. Sean, let me get you in here for one more kick at it, and that is Mike Schreiner, I think everybody agrees, punches above his weight at Queen's Park, but he's still only one guy down there. Do you think, how does this party make a breakthrough and give him some company down at the Legislative Assembly?
I think that's a really important question. I think that we run on his record. We've talked about potential oppositions here. I don't think any of those older parties have been referred to as the most effective opposition repeatedly in the press. We have a bunch of different challenging problems ahead of us, and we need to get Mike a team into Queen's Park. We've got some great candidates like Diane Sachs, former environmental commissioner, and we know what Mike brings in terms of his integrity, his hard work. We're here to earn your vote, not buy it. That's why Mike was the only person who didn't vote for the $1 billion license plate sticker. We need to look at new solutions. We need to see innovation in the leadership. Scientists around the world, they're not saying that the sky is going to fall. They're saying it's falling right now. And the best that Doug Ford can seem to come up with is don't look up.
I saw that movie. That was a good movie. All right, that's our time here. I thank you, Sheldon, for that 5-shot, because I do want to thank all of our guests for appearing on our program tonight. Zara Sultani for the Progressive Conservatives, Kim Wright for the NDP, Tim Murphy for the Liberals, Sean Yeo for the Greens, and Sabrina Nanji, whom you can read in the Queen's Park Observer, and she'll actually be a guest on our daily On Poly podcast, which is running, as we say, every weekday during this writ period. So, Sabrina, look forward to chatting with you again on Friday. And in the meantime, good luck on the good luck on the hustings out there, everybody. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Steve.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, May the 4th, 2022. Star Wars Day in most households. The 49th anniversary of the death of former Premier Leslie Frost in mind. Frost, incidentally, won 3 straight majority governments in the 1950s, and no one has done that since. The pandemic toll on Ontario's healthcare and long-term care sectors is almost incalculable. Tomorrow, we'll ask how that factors into this election. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
TVO.org has a brand new look online. For the latest Ontario current affairs from our digital team, from The Agenda, of course, and for all of our podcast documentaries and programs, check out the slick new website at TVO.org.
Looking for more of TVO's in-depth current affairs and documentaries? Visit tvo.org/daily and sign up for our daily newsletter with links to agenda interviews, read Steve Paikin's articles, and preview our upcoming documentaries. That's all at tvo.org/daily.